Okay, everybody, good evening. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore here in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we're here with another of our virtual events on this kind of overcast day in Phoenix. It's been like 110 and 115 degrees all this past week, and tonight, I think it's because they knew Joe was going to be on the program. They gave us a nice downpour of rain. It's been really great. Yeah, it's really lightened our spirits. But yeah, we're here to talk about Joe's just wonderful new book, Moon Lake, and to give a little formal introduction, Joe Lansdale is the author of nearly 4 dozen novels, including More Better Deals, the Edgar winning, The Bottoms, Sunset and Sawdust, Leather Maiden, and many, many more, including Paradise Sky, one of my personal favorites, The Thicket, and so many more.
Yes.
He has received 11 Bram Stoker Awards, a Spur Award, the British Fantasy Award, and you have to help me with this one, Joe, Grinzani Cavour Prize. He lives with his family in
that's close enough.
Nacogdoches, Texas. Nacogdoches. Joining us today, I'm really pleased to have with us Gabino Iglesias, and he's a writer, professor, book reviewer, editor, and translator living in the same part of Texas, Austin. He's the author of Zero Saints and Coyote Songs and the editor of Both Sides. His work has been translated into 5 languages, optioned for film, nominated for the Bram Stoker Award and the Locus Award, and won the Wonderland Book Award for Best Novel in 2019. His reviews appear regularly in places like NPR, the Los Angeles Review of Books, San Francisco Chronicle, Volume 1 Brooklyn, Criminal Element, Mystery Tribune, and other venues. Gabino, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Awesome. It's kind of funny usually when folks read the bio, the Stoker nod seems impressive, and then you do events with Joe, and he collects them. He has a whole box of them, and some of us are still fighting for that one, but Joe gets them all, and he deserves them. So on we go and on we try.
So Gabino's gonna be talking with Joe. Actually, both of us are going to be talking with Joe about his new book, Moon Lake, and about what else is going on in Joe's world. I'm sure he's got lots of other projects, and for those of you watching on Facebook, which I guess is all of you, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the comments field. So if you have questions for Joe or Gabino, go ahead and put them in the comments, and I'll do my best to ask as many of the questions as we have time for. So Gabino, I'll hand it over to you for the moment.
Sweet. Well, Joe, we're here to talk about Moon Lake, and we're going to get to that, but we've done a couple of events together, and I always have questions at the end, and you know how these things go. They chop you off, and that's it. Here's my year so far. It's been a Lansdale heavy year. I read this thing for a little secret project, we shall say. I reviewed this thing for Locus. So that was, that was a jump. And now I've read this thing. And taken together,
wow, it's been a Lansdale year.
It's been a Lansdale heavy year. Each one of these books could have been written by a different person, but they were all written by you, because Lansdale writes crime, horror, thrillers, noir, science fiction, a love story once in a while. You play in a lot of markets. You play everywhere in publishing. How do you approach that, man? How do you know this is for this place and this thing is a hardcover Mulholland book? Because you've been at this for a while, and I just need to learn how you do that.
I don't always know. When I'm doing for Mulholland, I know they want a book that has crime orientation, at least to some degree. But sometimes I'll have a book I've started, and when it's time for, I have a contract with Mulholland, I'll look and go, this is the one that I've got started that will fit. And I think it's something I really want to do. And I think it's a good project and a good book, something that I'll have a good time doing. And so I start doing it. I've got like 5 or 6 novels. I try not to talk too much about it, but I got 5 or 6 of them laying around started, not finished. and I have a lot of short stories finished, and I do that. But I learned a long time ago that I don't write well if I don't write what I want to write. And I have to feel like I write like everybody I know is dead. That's always my, saying. And by that, I mean, it's not that I don't care about my audience, but when I'm writing, I don't. Because when I'm writing, I can't keep that in mind. I don't care a damn whose feelings I hurt. When I'm writing, I don't care if it's for this group, that group, what group, if it's politically correct or politically incorrect. It does not matter at all. It matters that if I'm capturing these characters and their stories and I'm making them as real and I'm writing them as honest as I can, And so to me, then when I get done, then I hope like hell somebody likes it. That's a different thing. Now I'm in my market mode, It's like you've created a new candy bar and you're going to go for the one you like. Then when you get through, you hope somebody likes it. Right. And so that's kind of how that works for me.
Makes a lot of sense. And that's something that you brought up last time we talked. You do you. So you're not paying attention. Yeah. You're not allowing the rules of the little part wherever you decide to play, whether it's crime or sci-fi or horror.
Right. Or I start sounding like everybody else. Right. And if I always feel too that if I fail, I've failed on my own merits or lack of merits, depending on how you look at it. And if I succeed, it's the same way. I certainly want to write something that people like when I'm finished, but when I'm writing it, I have to write what I like. I know a few writers are really good at figuring out what the mass audience really likes. And I have no idea, I really don't. And when I tried doing that, I just came up with tapioca pudding because it's about not offending anybody. It's about, trying to, well, what's the trend now or what's popular now or who's popular now. Right. And I think you learn from those people, you learn from good people, and you got your influences are going to show in your work till you die. But there's a difference in an influence and a copycat. You put these things in and you start putting them in the blender. There's a difference in a fruit salad and a blended drink. A fruit salad, you can see all the different vegetables or fruits or whatever that are in it. But when you do a blender, it's just this mixture and it tastes different. It's unique because you're not having one taste and then another taste. You're having this one unique taste. And you just got to hope you put the right damn vegetables and fruit in it, or otherwise it's going to taste pretty nasty. But you do that on your own taste. That's the only way you can do it. Only way I can do it.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the politically correct and not giving a damn about who you anger. I would argue as a professional reviewer that from time to time you select things that are going to make people uncomfortable, and you say, hey, look at this ugly thing. Let's talk about this. In Moonlake, race is everywhere. I would argue it's one of your most race-centric books. You have a woman, black woman, the first cop in that city. You have a little bit of a interracial love going on. There's that racial tension, and we find that throughout your entire work. Where you come from, the stuff that you've experienced with your friends in your childhood. It seemed to me like after the 4 years that we just had, this was kind of like that book that got the discussion going again about how bad racism is. And it's not like this in your face kind of stuff. It's like, hey, this particular time and place, these things were happening. And, kissing a black woman could get you in trouble. How do you approach
it really could.
Work? So tell us about how you...
No, I'm just saying that I think I have some books that are probably even more in your face than this one, but I certainly think that's there. But there's a difference in doing it as a gimmick and doing it as part of a natural outgrowth of the story and who you are and the thematic aspect that you're getting across. I never know I have a theme until I'm writing it. And I never planned to write about race, but it's so much a part of what I experienced growing up. I'll tell you right now, it's 100 times better than it was when I was growing up. For all of my complaints about it, for all the things I see, there was a time when a black person could not even talk to a white woman without taking a chance on their life. Or I remember my mother walking down the sidewalk when I was a kid, and if a black person was on the sidewalk, he'd take his hat off and step off the side of the sidewalk. And these were older men. I saw it. I can tell you how many times I saw people do that. And they weren't allowed into restaurants. They weren't allowed to drink out of water fountains. So yeah, things are better. But if we start saying things are better, it's all good, we don't want to talk about that. Let's be sure we don't use any offensive language or whatever. Let's forget the past. You're going to repeat it. I'm not even sure we learn a goddamn thing from history anyway, from what I've seen. I just hope we do. And we have the opportunity to. But as soon as you start covering it up, like the Holocaust, you know, if you say that never existed, that doesn't mean you have to, you know, drag out the horrors of it all the time. But it means that you can't forget that, because it will happen again. And you can't, and I think you can get into slicing and dicing every word everybody says so that you can say, got you on Twitter. And I say, go to hell. I just don't care. The important part is, am I telling my truth? And I think of myself as a very progressive guy, but I don't want to be in anybody's club. I don't want to be in the liberal club or the conservative club or the middle of the road club, because none of those things really fit. And none of us are like that, really. We're all very, very mixed. I can have a dead-on opinion because I think it's just the right opinion to have. And then I can have an experience that makes me think, well, maybe I ought to rethink that, you know? And it's usually something small, something, you know, relatively unimportant, because the things that matter seem to have solidified over time. And so, but I just think that if you're going to be a writer and you're going to say, I want to talk the right things for the right people, and I want to make this clear and say I want to have a progressive way of doing it, you have to start from an honest place. And the honest place is stuff I've seen and the things people say. And when you write, you got to get away from it being you. You know, there are going to be you in it. There's going to be, you know, if a dog barks, that's you in the book. But on the other hand, from another standpoint, it's not you, because you borrow from what you hear. And I've read books recently where they were obviously so intentionally not trying to hurt anybody's feelings that, you know, I'd rather eat tapioca pudding, you know, than deal with trying to read this, because it's so obvious that they're afraid, and they're afraid to approach real problems. Now, I don't think my novels are meant just to be, you know, about problems. They're also entertaining, they're stories, but I'm that engine is underneath all that. I'm driven by that, the collision between genre and literature. And it's always been that way for me, or at least once I started writing well, and I didn't know what I was doing. And if you had told me Moon Lake was going to have racial issues in it when I started it, I wouldn't have really known that. I maybe it'd have some, but I have no idea. But it's the thing that offends me most. It's the thing that's left the biggest scar on my soul. No matter how much things have improved, I remember how it was. And I remember just putting a hat and a coat and a tie on it doesn't change the basic problem.
Right. Yeah. And you talked a little bit about elements right now in the mixed drink, this smoothie that you often prepare. I don't want to go back to Patrick's 11 Stokers. I feel like you have the things that you love, and you're trying to tell your story, and the character development is there, and the stories are wildly entertaining. And from time to time, I feel like you have your kids, and one of those kids is horror, and you have this temptation. Yeah. And so this is obviously a Mulholland book. It's about dead bodies stuffed in trunks, but it's about dreams where skeletons are trying to get you. And it's about ghosts visiting you in the night and pulling your feet. So when you're doing that, when you feel about, like, I'm writing this story about murder and mystery and bodies stuffed in trunks at the bottom of the lake, let me throw in some horror, because it's just so much fun.
Yeah.
Do you just sprinkle it in or let it happen?
Well, no, I think crime and horror aren't that far apart.
Agreed. Yeah.
I think the worst crime is the greatest horror. I mean, horror in the supernatural sense doesn't scare me in reality. I have to be involved in the book to be scared, you know, and I can be. When Stephen King wrote about vampires in, say, Salem's Lot, I was creeped out. But, you know, not only do I not believe in vampires, I'm an atheist. So that cross probably wouldn't help if I was a vampire. You'd be screwed, you know.
Right.
But the point is that if you can convince people of it, that's what counts. And I believe that one of the things is I brought the tools from all these different things and have opened that toolbox and used them. But I would argue that, you know, a skeleton of somebody murdered is horror. even if there's no supernatural elements or whatsoever, you know. So I think they're closer than people think. When I was first starting out, I was writing mysteries in the pure sense of mysteries, what I call the clockwork mystery, where everything fits together just perfectly. You know, and you want to solve things when you're writing a book like mine. I think I solve things, but you know, you leave certain things for people to consider and for the imagination. But when I was studying those clockwork mysteries, I learned how plot worked. And, you know, I learned so much about plot from just the mystery novel itself. And I read everybody. I read Agatha Christie. I read Raymond Chandler. You know, I read Dorothy Sayers. I read Hammett. I read Kane, who's really crime, not mystery. But, you know, I've read all of these different kinds. I remember reading Edward Hoke and saying, how did he do that? You know, in the short stories that he wrote. And I would read, you know, somebody like James Lee Burke and say, okay, I know this is really close to what I know, but it's not a clockwork mystery. It's not what it is. Right. But the clockwork mystery helps you. It informs you if you want to write more of a crime story, because there's some internal logic that starts to lodge inside your head to put things together. And especially for somebody like me that doesn't plot, doesn't write out an outline. I don't know. And I have such a great time and I'm writing this stuff. I go, I did not know that was going to happen. And about 80 pages in, sometimes I said, whoa, I need to go back and fix something so that can happen. You know, so that happens too. But generally when I'm writing, it's pretty close because I do have that clockwork understanding of plot so that I can break the hands off the clock when I want to, because I know how it works. If you know how something works, you can break the rules. It's the same thing with horror. The problem with a lot of horror is its whole purpose is to be horrifying. That's it. And you lead up to it, bam, that's it. And that works for a while. But after a little bit, the better horror has characters. It has dialogue. It has mystery. And that's where you go back to the things I was talking about, a sense of mystery. And if you want a feeling of action or scope, there's nothing better than a Western, a good Western. And, you know, I bring elements from the movies into this stuff too. I'm influenced by film, on radio shows and comic books and people I know and storytelling. And, you know, my dad was a great storyteller and a really interesting fella. So I borrow a lot of what he told me, and I borrow a lot of what was told to him by others, and so on and so on. So that's how it all gets mixed together. I don't want to overdo it, but I think I already have, but I'm trying to answer the question just thoroughly as I could, because I hate interviews when somebody's, what do you think about this? Oh, I like it.
I like it's good. No, I've seen plenty of interviews with you. I don't think you ever do that. And basically what you're saying kind of goes to something that I always tell my students. There's no horror without empathy. So build those characters first. Make me feel something when they go through something. And that's done, you know, terribly well here. You should stick to the whole writing thing, Joe. That's what I'm saying.
I think it's going to work out. Yeah, let me tell you a little funny thing about that. This is a true thing. This is the first year when I begin to think I was going to do okay.
All right.
And I've been doing okay for years, but it's just not that thing. When you're doing writing, it's such a, I don't know, it's just such a wishy-washy business, and you never know how people are going to respond, especially if you work like I do and just do my own thing. But this year I thought, well, I got Social Security done, I got retirement, you know, my funds and retirement. I'm making good money. I'm getting lots of film. You know what? I'm going to be okay.
You're going to be okay.
And I'm 70 this year. So I figured it out. I said, I'm turning 70. I think I'm going to be okay. You know?
When's your birthday, Joe?
October 28th.
Oh, so does that mean are you Libra or the next one, Scorpio?
Scorpio, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't believe in astrology, but that's the one I feel.
I'm an October guy too.
Or when are you?
I'm at the beginning. I'm October 2nd.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's Libra, right?
Which means I'm supposed to be balanced, which couldn't be further from the truth, obviously. But,
well, you know, my wife and I are supposed to be the worst pairing you can imagine. And we've been married nearly 50 years, 48, 49, something like that. I have 48. And so it wasn't true at all.
Good thing you don't believe in it.
Yeah, Joe.
Good thing.
One thing I wanted to add to what Gabino's been saying is, you know, in the new, we were talking before we got started a little bit about how the new book starts in 68 small town East Texas in 1968. And, obviously the whole country was undergoing the counterculture was in full
Very
bloom.
much.
But it's interesting how that trickles down into small town East Texas. And there's a scene at Gabino. Do you remember when they show the sheriff's office and you can almost see the colored sign that's just been painted over?
Right, painted over. It's still showing through.
And you're like, all right, well, but has anything really changed?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, when things were integrated, they reintegrated the schools, but a lot of other things weren't integrated. You didn't start seeing Black people suddenly go into restaurants, and you didn't see any of that stuff. So, but one reason I chose 68 was a multitude of reasons. And I think I had it about the time of the JFK assassination, because that also was a turbulent and different time in its own way. But I chose the 68 era because what was happening is that hippy dippy vibe that we had all been grooving on was starting to come apart. Because you're about to have Manson, you're going to have finally people looking at the Vietnam War and knowing it wasn't what we were being sold, and you're starting to see this sort of utopian viewpoint that we were trying to develop wasn't going to happen. People weren't going to loan their tools and play with each other's ass all the time. It wasn't going to work out, and so what I tried to do was say, okay, this was the transitional period. For me, I believe 68 was the big transitional period. From 68 into the early 70s in particular, by the time the Vietnam War ended, what was that, 74, 75, somewhere in there, that was when the country began to shift a little. Because a lot of them, like us, who had been struggling against all this stuff, I think we just took a deep breath, but we held it too damn long, And when we looked up, you had the yuppie generation. There's always a kind of backlash against what's gone before. And what you want to do is catch it when it's in that sweet spot in the middle, and it's never perfectly there. But we had a little bit of that in the middle 60s, about the time of the Beatles and things like that. That was a wild time, but a wonderful time. And you really believed things could be better. And the reason you believe that is we were adolescents. Nearly all of the whole movement, not the entire movement, but the largest part of it was driven by adolescence. And the biggest problem we had is that we could get tied up in adolescent interests. Like, can we put fuck on our shirt? We got to be able to, that's having your rights. And, and at that time, nobody did that. But on the other hand, was that really that important? And we would get caught up in these little things. But he said this, and and none of that stuff worked. In fact, it destroyed us. And not completely, because there's plenty of people still coming off that dream. I'm one of them, and I believe in the American dream. I just don't believe it's fair, and I don't believe it's meant for people to be rich. It's meant for people to have a home, to have a job, to be able to make sure your kids are okay. You got a roof over your head and food. That's all it was ever originally meant. It wasn't meant for everybody was going to be rich. Some people were going to be, but that wasn't what it was. And that's when 68, we all started realizing not only that the American dream had been distorted and that everybody was supposed to get a college education and be rich, which isn't what it meant, but also the world wasn't going to change as much as we had hoped. Though what I do is I give us a lot of credit. When I hear people say boomer, I want to punch their mouth out, because we're the guys who came along with civil rights. A lot of Black people put their ass on the line, but also a lot of white people. We were the anti-Vietnam War group. It was first of the 70s was the beginning of the women's, feminist movement. And then not long after that, the gay movement. All of that comes out of that. And you hear people say this because they're ignorant and they don't know what was going on. I had one writer say, who was born in the 70s, I think, ours was the first generation under the cloud of the bomb. So what the hell are you talking about? 1950s was when it was, right after World War II, really. In 45, the war was over. And then all of a sudden, that's why everything in all the comics and shows were all science fiction, or they had some science fictional element. Because back then, people actually wanted to believe in science, and that was a good thing. But also, every generation has these changes. But we always try to, the next generation, and we did it too, we tried to throw out the other generation as being unimportant, and we were wrong. just as every generation is wrong, but also right in some areas. And the areas would be civil rights. That wasn't, a lot of people I knew actually felt that black people were getting a bad shake and that they ought to have, but they weren't going to speak up about it. And so that made it uncomfortable when I got older and started speaking up about it, because that wasn't what you're supposed to say in East Texas, even if you did believe it. And being an atheist didn't exactly excite them a whole lot either.
I love your idea about the atheist vampire. You got to put that into a story somewhere.
There's a funny thing. There's an old the Fearless Vampire Killers with Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, and there's a thing in there, and I don't remember it exactly, but the guy holds up a cross to the vampire, and you see he has the Star of David. He said, "Boy, do you have the wrong vampire?" You know.
Or George Hamilton in Love at First Bite.
Yes.
God, I love
right.
That. Sorry, Gabino.
For the millions and millions watching at home, if you're listening and you're thinking, when the world opens up, I'm going to go up to Joe at a convention and call him a boomer. Listen, Joe's not the guy. He'll whoop your ass without having to punch you. There's videos on YouTube of him doing his thing, so don't. I'm glad Patrick brought up the time. Every narrative takes place, within the context of its time. And besides all the racial stuff that we already talked about, that demands of you as the writer to mentally occupy that time. So the cars are a different thing. There's yelling from the first floor because we ain't got no cell phones. There's no Twitter. It's newspapers. That's how the news gets out and what people talk about and what gets Daniel in trouble. Yeah. How do you ignore? You're on the Zoom event right now. How do you ignore your immediate reality for so long and just become immersed? Is it just from memory? Do you have to sit down?
It's mainly from memory.
Yeah. All right.
The thing that you have to watch is that you don't stay where you come from. And I mean that time-wise, because this also goes 68 and it goes to 78, so that even that time is a changed time, because where the civil rights is really non-existent in the 60s, it's begun to crack the ice in the 70s, like with Ronnie being the first black cop. And a lot of times when they did that, they thought, well, it was a token sort of thing, but that didn't mean it was a token thing for those people that finally got that job. They was serious for them, And so I think back on all those things. And I remember when you left home, if you came back and weren't dead, it was good, because nobody was calling you every 15 minutes. You weren't calling. There was no looking up anything on your cell phone. You had to remember it. You actually had to have a good memory about things. I used to know phone numbers all over the place. Now I don't need them. I just punch a button, but I do still try to keep my memory active about things that I want to remember. And that includes that era. And that includes the things that I put in the book. So for me, it's not that hard. In fact, I would much prefer to write about the past, not because I have any overly happy, nostalgic view about the past as a whole, although there are many things about the past that I really do love and really do miss. But there are also things I never like to blind myself with nostalgia. So I always try to keep those things in memory. And also they're the well for all of my work. And I think that's important too, is to go back to that well and crank it up and say, this is what it was like then, as best as you can do it. You can never really do it completely, because at the same time you're doing that, in another way, you're always writing about your time. You're always writing about your time. At the same time, you're trying to do that. But the joy of writing historicals is I don't have to worry about technology, which makes life a whole lot less interesting to me. Others, might disagree, and they certainly have that right. But I think it was a more interesting time in that respect, although I wouldn't want to give up my cell phone.
Or have to go to the library every time you want to figure something out.
Yes. And you did. I would go to the library and spend an entire day. I'd say, Karen, it was on Saturday. I'd say, honey, I got to go to the library and be there all day, and I'd go to the library and I'd have stacks of books and reading through them. And I greatly enjoyed that. But I will say that's a good thing, because if I need to write a book, I can get this research in front of me right away. I don't have to make a trip to town. I don't have to stay there all day. I can get it condensed. And then if I like that, I'll get a book. I have a lot of history books here. I have a lot of books. Well, Pat and I do a lot of things with the West. We talk about the West.
Yeah.
So I got a bunch of that stuff. So it's not that I don't still do that, but I also can afford to own the books now where I don't have to go to the library. And I'm a big supporter of libraries. It's just, I love being here, being able to do it and do it now.
There's a thing that folks who are familiar with you on social media might know about, and that's your passion for actual writing, sitting down and doing the thing, and also encouraging others. Like, how do you write a book? You sit your ass down and you write it. And I felt like there was a little bit of that. There was you talking about books inside Moon Lake. You're talking about, tiny little advances that don't stretch too much. You're talking about self-published books by mysterious authors. So that was a really fun element in there. You were talking about books and libraries and research. How intentional was that? Like, here's some Lansdale knowledge for y'all about the business.
I would say that was intentional. I felt like I hadn't written enough about my own business. And in fact, the new book I'm working on has a writer in it too. And so I think I'm kind of, I feel like I explore things in groupings. I'll do this, and this is what I'm doing. A lot of the short stories and novels are addressing these issues, and then I'm done with that and I move on. I might come back to it, but generally I have these little sections like Edge of Dark Water, The Thicket, Paradise Sky, All the Earth Thrown to the Sky are all kind of the same group. And just outside of that, Fender Lizards, and then like, but I was exploring certain ideas about history. You had the Great Depression, you had the West as it was changing in the early 1900s. And then you had Paradise Sky, which was more the traditional West with non-traditional hero, which really was not too unlike the people out there doing the real West stuff, the people that were the Buffalo Soldiers. Then there were Black Marshals and so on and so on. And I tried to bring all of that to it. So I got a chance, but it's all still very historical. And All the Earth Thrown to the Sky is the Great Depression, for example. And Fender Lizards, though it's modern, it's a throwback in those old young adult books I used to like to read back when they wrote young adult books that were more like just straight novels.
It's amazing how in the Old West, how many like people speaking German and Dutch you'd see out in the frontier, right? Yeah.
And then you had the cavalry that for a while tried the bicycles for the bicycle corps, and people don't know a lot about that. And a lot of people don't know, like when there were times in the late 1800s or the late 19th century when people had telephones. They had things that you wouldn't think they had access to. And there were all sorts of inventions starting to happen. We were coming in for this revolution of, new machinery and technology of the time. Those were the, I guess the cell phones and the microwaves of their time was this new technology that everybody was coming up with. We were right on the edge of cars, and this was starting to be something that people saw. People don't realize that things didn't just stop here and then we have cars. It was like the little things were added. And telephones and when the telegraph came in, that changed everything.
That changed things. And the train. Yeah, we just did an event with Jeff Gwynne, who has a new book out on Pancho Villa and the whole punitive expedition down into Mexico. And
I want that. I gotta have that.
Talk about a bridge between the modern era. Here Pancho Villa, right. I think he sells the film rights to his battles to some film company. And they come out and try to film them.
I forgot that. I had read that.
It's just great. Yeah.
And I have a friend, William F. Nolan, who wrote Logan's Run. He's 90 something now. But his dad was the first person to drive a car across the border into Mexico to pursue Pancho Villa with, blackjack and Persian.
I'll be damned. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. My great-great-grandfather was actually down at Fort Huachuca during that period. And we actually, Gwynn's going to help us figure out from all the research whether he was on the expedition. I don't think he was, but
that's pretty cool.
For my purposes,
all this stuff is just like my grandmother. That's not that far away. My grandmother, who's died in the late 80s, was nearly 100 years old. She saw Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. So it's funny when people when you're young, especially, and I think it's more so now because everything, every 6 months, the world is so much more different, where it used to be more like every 10 or 20 years. When I was growing up in the 50s, it wasn't a whole lot different than it was in the 30s, you know, and so those things changed. But when you look back on it, I mean, my grandmother, who came to Texas in a covered wagon, and, you know, she lived while I was a teenager when she died. I mean, it's just amazing that we're not that far removed, and the people now are not that far removed from us.
Well, there were, I think the last Civil War soldiers, weren't they well into like the 40s and 50s?
Yeah, I think the 50s. I don't want to say for sure, but I think the last one may have died in the early 50s, but because he was as a teenager when he went in.
Yeah.
But I certainly was the 40s for sure. And they'd have parades, you know, they bring these guys out and prop them up on a stick, and you know. There it was. I think the last one was a Confederate soldier, but there may have been a Union soldier too. I don't remember, but I do remember when I was a kid reading about it and thinking, "Oh, that wasn't that long ago." And
I ran into a Navajo code talker at a Goodwill store in Sunny Slope, Arizona, and he's since passed, but he was one of the last ones. And I had a real nice.
I met some of them when they had the event. I think you may have been there. I maybe remember in Phoenix with Elmore Leonard was there. I was there. Bill Kreider was there. I think Lauren Esselman was there, and the code talkers.
That was amazing. Yeah. Sorry to derail us again. One more thing though, Joe, have you by chance written a novel or a story called The Stone at the Bottom of the Sea?
No.
Well, that figures into the Moon Lake. It's Daniel's, the name of Daniel's novel. The Stone at the Bottom of the Sea.
Oh, I forgot that. I didn't remember he wrote that. I need to though. I need to do that. The Stone at the Bottom of the Sea.
That's Daniel's
not
novel.
a bad title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot he even wrote that. Yeah, he did. And you know, I should have read that.
Moon Lake. Let's get back to Moon Lake then.
Yes.
You when you're listening to the first few seconds of a song, if it's a musician you like, you immediately recognize their tone. That happens with a Lansdale book, whether it's horror or sci-fi or just wildness or bizarro. You're the proto bizarro fiction guy for many of us. One of those elements is, no matter what's happening, it's humor. And I know that in crime and horror, a lot of people don't expect that. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about the role of humor when things get dark. As you know, I was wondering if I could go to Bora Bora, or what are two axe handles going to talk about? There's always a turn of phrase. There's always an idea. There's always a joke. There's always something to make you chuckle, even if it's, dead folks, pulled out of the ground and stuffed in car trunks. There's always something to laugh about in your work. And I know that you put a lot of, that doesn't just happen. That's a marvelous genius move that you do. That's your voice. So talk to us about humor.
It sort of happens in the sense that that's very much my sense of humor, and it just naturally rolls out. But I always feel that the books I've enjoyed best had humor in them, and the culture that I grew up in, they used humor, especially in the worse the situation, the more humor was used. It was about timing, sometimes it could be too soon. But it really was that. And the other thing about, you mentioned the axe handles and stuff like that. A long time ago, I learned a little trick from a writer named Ray Bradbury. And that's to imagine everything as being alive. Everything is being alive. Or as the Native Americans say, everything having a manitou, having a spirit. Even though I'm not spirit and not religious, I believe in a spiritual concept, and meaning that I have to feel connected to everything, because all of our our cells and everything else are we're all made up of stars, so there's that kind of interconnection. And I always think, if you think of things as alive, you can write about them better, and you can give them more human traits that are believable. You can't just say, hey, a rock has a nose. That's not going to work. It's got to be somehow how you integrate it into the work. And oftentimes those things are funny. Yeah, those descriptions are funny. And, the people, when I was growing up, they always had these wild sayings like it's hotter than two rats fucking in a wool sock. I always thought that was hysterical. And I worked it into a story once, big blow.
Yes, thank you. That's how the big blow starts.
Yeah.
And he works
But a lot of
because
that
it sets
kind
the
of
mood.
stuff, Yeah. And my dad, I remember he used to say, I'm so hungry, I see cornbread walking on the ground, and so stuff like that has stuck with me. And a lot of sayings I have no longer are applicable because people don't know what you're referring to, because that part of culture has changed so much. Even the way I talk isn't actually the way people talk in East Texas now. Even when people still have an accent, I have elements of my father's, my father's accent, my mother's accent, because they were older when I was born. So they'd had different experiences. I grew up with my grandmother and people like that, and they actually talked different, just a little different. And when you see the old letters that people wrote, you'd have thought everybody was having sex with each other the way they're written. Oh, my darling, my sweetest, I have missed you so much. Could you send me $10? The thing is all of this stuff that's why when you see a lot of modern people say, well, this was obviously this way they were having a relationship, they could have been, but it was just it was the manner, it was the way things were written, it was the way things were expressed. It's funny. Language is so funny. It's like when people say, you call your girlfriend sugar or honey or whatever. Those are edible things, and that's why where that comes from is the idea that you're so sweet, you're edible, sweetie, honey. And baby has to do with, oh, well, I think so much of you, you have you're as pleasant as a child. And then of course, you could have the pedophilia aspect of it from some people, but most people, what they mean is that it's the joy and innocence and wonder of a child. And so you call your loved one baby, male or female. Same way with honey, sweetie, whatever. And, I've seen people get worked up about that. And I think there are times, I don't want to come up to somebody I don't know. Hey, how you doing, baby? But if you come down south, I may be doing that because a lot of us do that. It's just part of the language. It's not meant to be offensive. It's meant, otherwise it's hospitality and it's endearment. I always love it when I do stop at some place and they go, well, sweetie, what do you want? And I just think, I like that. I'm not offended by that. I find that as being kind. And also I know they want a tip.
They do.
And that's the same thing in story. Timing is important.
There's so many great details in Paradise Sky. I remember you describing, you said something like, that the Apache could hear a fly, a fly fart a mile away under a jelly jar or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. See, I don't even remember a lot of those when people will tell me those things because, I don't keep a notebook of them. I'm just writing them. And sometimes I think that they get recycled a little bit in other books or slightly revised, but you know what? I don't care. It's because it's part of this cultural concept that I'm trying to create. Even though the stories may be different, the people may not know one another, they're still connected by this East Texas culture or this Southern culture or what have you. And so those things happen from time to time more than once. Also, I'm getting old.
It's funny you bring up getting old. Many years ago, you were in town for Christmas of the Dead, and I was starting out, and we met there. I covered the movie release, and I said, Joe,
I remember.
How do you do it, man? And you said, keep a bunch of things in the fire. Just have a bunch of things going on at once. And
you do
between,
that. You do.
I try. Yeah, I listened, man.
No, from things from you say on Twitter, I can tell you got all kinds of balls in the air.
I try, but you don't have anything left to prove, and we know that making it doesn't exist, and it's a post that keeps moving. But at this point, you keep doing that. You're always cooking up something. And you just mentioned, you're not 21 anymore, but there's something behind you kind of like egging you on and pushing you to keep doing the thing.
My friend artist Mahar used to say I was like the devil was behind me with a whip. And I always love that, That's another one of those East Texas sayings, and that's more from her generation. But to me, it's about creativity. It's about having this joyous opportunity of life to create. And, you know, I'm a creative person. If I weren't writing, I'd be doing something else, probably not as well. But, you know, I'm interested in, I want to direct a film. I have one that I've been having an option on for years to direct. My son wrote the script. They option it every 6 months, actually. And so if they never make it, well, at least I got some money. But I'm hoping that they allow me to direct it, because I would like to screw up once, at least once. I'd like to have that opportunity. And I think I would do well at it. I mean, I think I understand film pretty damn well. And I've hung out with, you know, people on sets a lot. A lot of my friends are directors and actors and things like that. So you know, you pick up a lot. I remember asking some people for advice. I remember asking Bruce Campbell, I said, what do you think is a good advice for directing? He said, make sure everybody's in the same movie. And I realized what he meant, because you'll see a movie and it's like everybody's read a different script or something. They don't know that this is the tonality of the movie. Right. They're merely playing their part. You know, I think if I remember right, and Bruce, if he's out there, I'm sure he'll correct me, is that he talked about somebody who was like a machete, and the guy was like hacking through the jungle, and, you know, he was sweating and working. And then the lady was just kind of hopping along, and, you know, because she's in a different movie in her head. So I remember him telling me that. And I remember Jim Mickle telling me, well, if you shoot a shot and they're sitting on the couch, make sure you got room at the other end to shoot in this direction. So, I mean, it's stuff like that that I think so funny, but so real, you know. And others have told me get a lot of coverage, and others said don't get too much coverage because then they mess with it. So you know, there's all these different ways. The same with writing, is that writing, I can tell you my way of doing it, and I've been successful at it, doing it my way, but it may not be your way. And the other thing is that what I learned a long time ago is that most writing books didn't help me at all, but a handful of them, I stole this from it, or I stole that from it. Or I would be listening to somebody like Robert Bloch, who I knew a little bit, talking, and I'd go, okay, I'm going to pay attention to that. Or Richard Matheson, I had the pleasure of meeting a few times, and I would listen to them when they talked about writing. I got to have Ray Bradbury invited me to lunch one day with my friend Lee Langford, and we had such a good time just listening. As talky as I am, I didn't say a word. I just sat there and heard him and George Johnson talk about Rod Serling and so on, but he also talked about writing, just little bits of things here and there, a little bit. So you find what works for you, you know, not the same thing doesn't work for everybody, but you can steal. And it's good to listen to other people's viewpoints, because it may be exactly what you are looking for. And I know one writer, and I won't mention who because he might not want me to, gave me a bit of advice once, and it changed my life. And when I saw him a little, I don't know, maybe 3 years later, I said, man, you know, when you told me that, he said, oh, I don't work that way anymore.
It's funny how fast, you know, once we get talking with Joe, just time just goes like so fast. But so before we don't have too much time left, and I have some questions, but yeah. Gabino, do you mind if we kind of get in?
Oh, please.
Did you find, I want to ask you too. I found that, and I want to ask Joe about how important water is in your books. Not like I'm going to write a PhD dissertation, but you know, it's like I think about how you know, thematically, symbolically, in the bottoms, and obviously Edge of Dark Water.
Edge of Dark Water.
You know, but especially in this book. Can you just give us the brief sales pitch? And I should say,
let me see if I can do it briefly.
For those of you all watching, Joe has signed a bunch of these for us, and
that's right.
That's right, Yay. Man. Can you give us the basic plot, kind of outline or
of the book?
Of the book, just how it starts.
Well, let me just tell you this. And what it does is it starts in 1968, as we've said, and it has to do with Daniel Russell, who is 13 when the book starts. And he is on the bridge late at night with his father in a big old car of that era. And they're sitting there, and his father is telling him about this lake, Moon Lake, and what's under this lake. And he says, that's where I met your mother. That's where we lived before that lake was there. And you also learn that Daniel has a strange relationship with his parents. His mother and his father have split. His mother is sort of, I guess what you would say is that, I think what I said, you know, she looked like a hippie and she had a Wall Street heart or something like that. I don't remember the term I used, but that's conceptually her. And the other guy, her husband, is though he was a librarian, and which he loved, but he quit to make, to become an accountant so he'd have money for her. But essentially what he really is a narcissist that is trying to act like, look what I've given up. I'm also a martyr. And so the son is listening to all these stories about what went on down there under that lake. And he thinks, what is this all about? They've lost their home. They're out here in the car. And then all of a sudden his father drives through the bridge, this old rotten bridge, and into the lake. And as they go under, the windshield collapses and pushes Daniel out through the back of the car, out through the back windshield. And he's trying to get to the surface, but he's drowning. And he looks up, and here is a mermaid, a beautiful mermaid, who comes down and grabs him and pulls him up. Only she's not a mermaid. She's a young lady with her father fishing, a black man and his daughter, who are out there fishing and just happened to see him. And this is during the time when blacks and whites weren't supposed to hang together much, not unless it was under maybe a working situation or whatever. So they take him in and take care of him while they're trying to find his relatives. And then, not to give anything much away, but later on in the 1970s, when he's grown, he gets a phone call and they say, hey, the lake dried up and we found your father's car and his remains. And guess what? There's human remains in the car trunk too. And then that leads to all kinds of complications and all kinds of mysteries that I hope reach a satisfying conclusion, even if they're not clockwork.
And this whole notion of the town underneath the water, is so beautifully
Well, water's
done.
a thing, water, we're made up of water. And I live in East Texas. Like today, as I was driving home, it came like a rainstorm that was just out of hell. And by the time I got home, it was 90 something. It was steaming. And right now it's dark, but it's cloudy and it looks like it's going to rain. I can see that. So water is a big thing here. And people don't think of that when they think of Texas. They think of more the southwestern part or northern or so on, or far west. This isn't like that. This isn't desert. It isn't mountains. It isn't buttes like, Utah in all the movies that represented so many of Texas and John Ford's movies. This is more like Louisiana. So water is a constant. I have a pond on my property, and we have alligators and we have snakes and we have mosquitoes and things like that you commonly think of as being a part of the southern climate. So water is something that we are very much aware of, and storms and rain. And it's also just this great representational thing for human conflict or human thought. And it can be peaceful rains, and I'm noted for using rain, and it's not because I mean to, but it's because sometimes when I'm writing, it's raining.
Well, stuff gets washed away. People take the river on
Yes.
a journey. You take it on a journey.
Absolutely.
It divides
It's an
people.
artery.
Yeah.
The Sabine River is an artery to the sea, and that's just like an artery to the heart. The heart of the world is the oceans and the sea. And you have this giant artery, the Mississippi, or the smaller artery, but this really, really long one, the Sabine, the Angelina. All of these things, they're bleeding our essence into the sea.
And you also have a thing I was going to ask you about with, anytime you have the strong, young female character, they always steal the damn show. I mean, you have these wonderfully headstrong young, I was thinking of True Grit, that sort of style.
Yeah.
There's somebody like
that's
Ron.
because I've grown up with strong women.
Yeah.
My grandmother, my mother, my wife, my daughter. My daughter is small, but she is fierce. And my wife, too. I mean, she's the reason I have a career, because she knew how to be steadfast, and so the strong women are a big part of my life. My niece Pam was a sheriff's detective, and so she's had experience, and she's tough anyway. And so a lot of the women that I'm impressed with, and some women that I don't know that well, but I've observed, and I would go, oh, that's magnificent. I think some of the women that are like that, if you ever said they were feminists, they'd go, what are you talking about? I mean, my wife would say she's a feminist. My daughter would say she is too, but my mother wouldn't have. there wasn't such a thing then. And then as it started to come in, she thought, oh, that's terrible, those feminists. And she was probably one of the best examples of that, because she didn't live life like other women did. You know, she did her own thing. She was a painter. She was an amazing person. So yeah, I think that's why.
Yeah, you got Ronnie, you've got, the character in Fender Lizards, there's so many examples.
Yeah, and Reba in Rusty Puppy.
The vampire midget, is that the
Yes.
is that the...
the 400-year-old vampire midget that he what's his name? Leonard calls her.
Yeah. Speaking of Hap and Leonard, there are questions inevitably. What's going on in their world? What's going on?
Well, there will be a novella coming out of their story. I mean, not a novella. Let me take that back. There will be a book of novellas and one short story that'll be coming out, I think, next year from Tachyon. That's just stuff that's already been out there, but it's never been collected. So it will be collected. And as for when the next Hap and Leonard book will be, I can't say. That when they start speaking to me, I'll write about them. But right now, I feel like that I needed a breath of fresh air from them, so I had them pack their suitcase and hit the road. But after a little while, they'll just show up in the living room, and there they are, and leaving vanilla cookie packages around and Dr. Pepper and all that sort of stuff.
It's
funny, so in the living room of my head. So I really couldn't say, but they'll be back. I certainly feel like that they'll be back. I'd like to see Vanilla Ride show up in her own novel too.
It's interesting, the character, the Candles, the man, the father of Ronnie. I can't remember his first name, but boxing's very important in his world, and that sort of physicality, and of course, it had me thinking of Leonard's, of Leonard, but also his uncle and some of the short stories you've written.
Right.
Yeah, great.
Right. Well, because that's part of my life. I've never been one of those people that go, I can't show that I've got a tough side. I do. There's a difference in a tough side and a mean side and a vicious side. There's a difference in what people think of as toxic masculinity and then masculinity. They're not the same thing. I'm not trying to not be masculine, but I'm not trying to be either. I just, I grew up in this certain culture that I borrowed things from that I believe in. And I believe that you tote your own water, you care for the people you care for, you take care of them when you can, but you also have to have empathy. You have to have sympathy. And I'm willing to tell you how I feel. I don't keep my feelings to myself, So there's different versions of that. But the idea that macho used to not have a negative connotation, it gradually developed one for people putting the most negative aspects into that word and applying it to people who were negative representation. But my father, he's my idea of what macho ought to be. He had faults. He had some things I didn't agree with him on, that some things very much so, but his basic character, I love that. And I always, my kids, I always said, the only thing you owe me one thing, and that's your character. Everything else is you. That's on you. But you owe me your character. And I want it to be better than mine. And because I owed my parents my character, and whether that character is good or bad is up to me. But I try to make it good, and I try to insist that my children did that. Now they're grown now, and I think we lucked out. They were smarter than I was, and they've done better in many ways. But I appreciate that, and I don't think we ought to be putting our foot on masculinity. I think we ought to define true masculinity as opposed to toxic masculinity. They're not the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I lifted weights. I did all, I'm older now, but I boxed. I liked physical contact. It didn't mean I went out and beat up people, but I liked boxing. I liked martial arts. I liked wrestling and judo and all of those things, which some people now don't even want to discuss, because everybody does that. It's got to be a killer redneck. Well, that's not true. It's not true.
Well, we have some
and
questions.
Gabino, he looks like he could bench press a house.
Yes, he does.
I'm gonna pick up some martial art tricks next time I see you. So it's all good.
Okay.
We have some great questions here that are coming in.
Okay.
And also someone who has a wonderful name, which is Queso Saint Eel.
That's That is nice.
Queso I can't, St. Eel, I think. It's a great name. Says, Joe, do you think you'd ever write a book about your martial art?
Well, I wrote one called Lost Echoes, in which martial arts is the theme of that book. It's not all it's about. It's not completely a martial arts book, but it's about the philosophy of martial arts. And so that is in Lost Echoes. So I've done that. I thought about writing a sort of like a book on Xinchuan, which is my martial art, which is the one that I am the creator of, over having brought all these different martial arts together. And it's in the United States Martial Arts Hall of Fame and things like that. But every time I start to, I realize that I don't know anything. What you know changes. And the 70-year-old martial artist is different than the cocky 21-year-old or the cocky 31-year-old or the cocky 41-year-old, or for that matter, the cocky 51-year-old. And so it all changes, and the kind of things that work for you also change as you do. Same way with writing. I mean, there's things I could do before that I can't do now, but there are things I couldn't do before that I can now because of experience. So the writing book a book just on the martial arts would be philosophy, concepts, and principles. So I hope to write it, but that's the closest I've thought about it. And the other way is that it's in Lost Echoes, if you want to, look at that book and kind of get that out of it.
It's one of my favorites of your books. It's funny, and that book actually comes up in more Poison Pen conversations, sort of indirectly.
Really?
Huh. I like to talk to people about, people that write about, violence that occurs in specific places, homes, battlefields. Right. And of course, there's the big riff in Lost Echoes about, do these physical locations retain something from the violence that occurs there?
Right.
Love it. Todd asked.
Audio chronology.
Is that what they call it?
That's what I called it.
Todd asks, anything new happening in movie or TV land?
Yeah. Peter Dinklage has re-optioned The Thicket. And Keith, my son, has done a screenplay based on my novella, The Projectionist. And I'm hoping to direct that one. And so that's out there. Edge of Dark Water is still under option. I don't know how that's going to work out as the option comes to an end. You never know. There's a couple of projects I cannot talk about, but I would just say I've got one short film that's forthcoming, and looks like I'm tapped to write a full-length feature. So it just, and it's not, neither of those are based on my work. They're based on someone else's work. But I'll talk about that later. And then there's things I forgot. Love, Death, and Robots has done. First season did 2 of mine. The second season did 1 of mine. Creep Show, me, Keith, and Casey had written a story that they adapted to that about 2 years back.
Fantastic. Rachel, one of our viewers, has some great stuff here. I got to bring up some of it. She says, I've read all of Joe's books, except for Moon Lake. No one writes like him. No one. I just asked as a Facebook post if anyone knew any authors similar. So far, no responses. But here's her question, which you've touched on, which is a good one. She says, Joe, do you ever have issues with people thinking you are racist because of some of the language used in stories that don't understand what you're doing?
Well, stupid is as stupid does. The thing is that if you read my stuff and you've got half a brain, you can tell. Those people that don't, they just see the word and suddenly, oh my God, then they've missed the whole point. If I don't use the word at certain times, then I don't make that point that there are people who think that way. And I also don't make the point that there are people who use that language that, strangely enough, don't think that way. And that's what's so strange to me in the 60s is those words were so common, but you could hear people as civil rights was going, people were like, Martin Luther King's good. He's telling them what's going on, and then they would use words that you would go, what? And so it's hard to, that's the other thing is people want to write about people as if they're here or they're there. And most people are kind of scrambled and our culture is a little bit scrambled. So yeah, have I had it? Yeah. I had one person write me about Cold in July just last year and sent me a note, said, do you know this word means this? Do you know this word used? And I wrote her back. I said, I wouldn't have used it had I not known those things. The problem is you don't know why I use them. And therein lies the problem. You know, it's just like people looking at Mark Twain. The right hates him because he's for civil rights. I'm talking about the far right. They hate him because he's for civil rights, and he's talking about how black people are treated. And it's just, and then the left, some of them hate him because I saw that word, you know? And to me, I just think, really? You don't understand what Twain was about? You know, some of the language that's used in the book, and you go to the very first, and he refers to Negro dialects. He doesn't use the slang words or for that, but just in the novel, because that's how people talk. And you have a guy who talks just like that, Huck Finn, but you begin to realize that Huck Finn's words aren't what make him. It's what he has learned. It's his heart. It's his soul. It's his feelings for his best friend, Jim, who he's supposed to turn in, because that's a Christian thing to do. You know, we were taught that was Christian, is to be white, not black. When I was a kid, you know, you'd hear people talk like that. And my mother would always say, no, you know. And here you have Huck saying, well, I know I'm supposed to turn in Jim, and I know I'm going to go to hell, but he's my friend, so I'm just going to go to hell. And the people that don't get that, you know, you can't pass out the cliff notes with every book. So some people are, you know, I'm not going to be universally admired. Fuck them.
Yep. There you go. Those are good words to end on. Fuck them.
Yeah.
Fuck 'em.
Right, Gabino?
Yeah. Put that on a shirt.
Fuck them, Joe Lansdale. That's right. Well, Gabino, I'm sorry to kind of dominate this little last
That was
part
great,
of the,
man.
of the thing. It's really been a treat to have you with us. Can you talk a little bit about, before we sign off, I know there's stuff that you can't say, but I know you have some work in progress, and tell us a little bit about your manuscript that you're working on now.
Me or Joe?
You.
Oh, me.
You.
I wrote another one because Joe taught us all. That's what you do. You finish one, and then you don't panic too much about it. Send it out into the world with a little note on the back that says, "If you like it, I love you. If you don't know, fuck you," as he just said. And there's one coming. We have an announcement that we'll get to make soon, and it'll be the best thing that I've written so far. And I think every writer knows that the next one just has to be better. But I'm excited about this new one. It's been a while, and I've been reading all the good stuff. So I was inspired for that one. COVID costed me my job. I lost my main job, so I had all that poverty and desperation, and you know, it was a pandemic, and I had no health insurance, so I stayed in a tiny room and I wrote my ass out. So
I'm sorry, brother.
Hopefully it's all good. You know how it is. Nobody had to send me any stamps, so it was all good.
Yeah, I did have that. That's another
exactly.
story. Yeah.
So that one we'll announce it soon. Hopefully folks will read it. I don't know when it comes out.
Is there anything you feel comfortable talking about the book itself? Or would you rather...
it's about a guy who loses his baby daughter to leukemia, and then is just mired with debt. And you know, I think the essence of noir is not bad folks doing bad things. It's really good people pushed to extremes who are forced to do bad things for all the good reasons. So I explored a little bit of that, and then I threw in, you know, some magic, some awful underground creatures, and a lot of violence, and you know, some racists. And this is funny that Joe was talking about this. If you look for the N-word in many of Joe's books, they're usually followed by somebody getting their teeth knocked down their throat. Right. So there's a little bit of that in that novel too, and a hell of a lot of violence down at the border. So excited about that.
That's why they're called crime novels.
Yes. Dancing with horror, because horror has to be there wherever I write something. So
well, we're all looking forward to it, man, and I really appreciate you joining us. Maybe we'll have Joe come back. Maybe we'll have Joe come back and be the guest moderator when we debut your new book here at the Poison Pen.
Read my Coyote song. That's a good one.
That would be awesome. All right, gentlemen. Again, we've been
I
talking
remember
about
when he stood in the background when I was at signings and stuff, but he was always there and he would tell me he was writing, and he was pretty clear now.
I was.
super cool.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that's
when this
great.
thing is over, hopefully Joe will be back here visiting and doing things at Book People, and we'll get to do these things in face-to-face world.
That'll be
Right.
great. We're all looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for watching out there on Facebook. And
Yes.
here's the new book, Moon Lake. Get it now.
Hey,
And gentlemen, thanks so much.
I like the cover too.
It's great.
Go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And have a great rest of your evening.